we are going to be in a new series. Did someone just say hey back? That's funny. We're going to be in a new series called Who is Jesus for the next 3 weeks, starting in John chapter 6 tonight, looking at, and there are actually 7 of these throughout the book of John, some of these I am statements. Okay, so in the same way that, here's what I do, right? When someone follows me on social media that maybe I don't know or is like, and I go and I find their profile, and you can look through pictures of stalk, but you can see even in like the very top of their profile, they've chosen to put a few words there to describe themselves. That tells me like really all I need to know about a person, right? Like I can find like who you're taken by. I've like through a series of emojis, I can figure out what color your hair is, which really helps me identify you in the rest of the pictures, unless they're all pictures of yourself, then it's really to identify you. What sport you play, what your number is, all these, even sometimes your favorite Bible verse, like whatever it is, I can find those things very quickly. And so as we're kind of figuring out who is Jesus, who does he say that he is, we're going to look at literally the words that Jesus uses to define himself as he's beginning to reveal himself to crowds and individuals that are coming around him, even to his disciples. We go, okay, this is who Jesus says that he is. And so we're going to spend some time, 3 weeks, just looking through all that. When I'm up here, I usually get to share stories about myself and talk about some different things, and sometimes they're really good, and I'm like, man, here's like this really highlighted moment of my life, and sometimes they're very much like, do as I say, not as I do moments. They're like not necessarily the most proud moments of my life. And so in 4th grade, taking it way back to Little Lane, before I hit a growth spurt and had height, I was at Village Elementary in Georgetown, Texas, and we were in the middle of this like PE cycle, when they call it. I don't know, it was like a few weeks of PE, and we were playing badminton. Like that was the focus of PE. And if you don't know what badminton is, it's like slow tennis with this weird little thing called a birdie, which is great because tennis is too fast for me. I don't have that kind of hand-eye coordination. But badminton is just little floaters, man. You just sit up there and someone will lob one up, you spike it in their face, make them cry, send them to the nurse's office. It's a dream come true for me. And so we have this thing, and I get partnered with this guy named Clint. And me and Clint wreck people. We destroy people. We steal souls on the badminton court through this entire tournament. We win the whole thing. We're grand champions, 4th grade at Village Elementary. It still brings pride to me this day. It was a great moment. And in that, we kind of begin to build this like a little friendship. And so Clint has this moment that a lot of us have when we're in elementary school, and we're kind of making friends on our own that are maybe separate from our parents' worlds and things like that. And he's like, hey, why don't you like come over one day? And so I'm like, you got badminton? No, I was like, oh, that sounds good. We can do that. And so his parents knew my parents, so I go over to his house one day, and Clint kind of lives in the middle of nowhere, and he's got like all of this land, and I remember pulling up to his house, and it was like I had seen a castle for the first time. And it was in that moment that I was like, dude, Clint is rich. Like I was like, this is awesome. I made a new friend, and this new friend lives at Six Flags. Like, this is going to be awesome. And so I like pull up, and I get out of the car, and I'm just like, I've never seen such a place. And I go to the door, and Clint answers it, and I walk in, and there's like hundreds of dead animals everywhere. It's like a dead animal zoo. And I'm seeing like all these things that I've never seen before. I'm like, I don't know what those horns are. Like, what is this thing? I only know what a house cat is. Why does that one look so mad? Like, I'm like, look at all these things. I'm like, dude, where do you get all these animals? And he's like, well, my dad like travels the world and hunts for things. And these are, I go, full stop. Your father has killed all of these? He is the manliest dude that I know. And I'm like, where is he? He's like, I think he's like in Africa hunting for something. I'm like, what? Your life is insane. I didn't even believe that Africa was real until this point because I'm never going to get to go there. Like, this is crazy. And so he has this moment that we have a lot of times when like friends come over or something like that, and we go, so like what do you want to do? I'm like, I want to look at your house, man. Like, this place is awesome. I've got like 3 bedrooms all on the first floor, 1,500 square feet. That's as big as your kitchen. Like, show me the world, all right? Aladdin me, please. And so he comes and he goes, well, he goes, you know what we could do? And I'm like, no, I don't. I feel like the possibilities are endless. He goes, we could just go ride the horses. We could just go ride the horses? Another thing I've never seen up close and personal. Yes, please. I'm like, what do you have horses for? He's like, well, my dad's also like semi-pro at polo, and when the horses get too old, we retire them, and we get to ride the old ones. I'm like, I don't care if they're the half-dead ones, dude. Put me on a pony. And so we go out to this like barn place, and we walk in, and there's all these stables. There's like 4 or 5 horses, and you can tell, like the fast ones, that you're like, we don't get to touch that one. And then you go, and you like see this other one, and I'm not kidding. It's just me and him, 4th graders, and all our glory at like 8 or 9, no adults around, and I'm like, that one? And he goes, yeah. I'm like, we're going to take that one and go over there and ride it. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, just you and me? He goes, yeah. I'm like, this is freaking dope. And so we take this horse, and we go into like this little corral area, and no parents around, no supervision, just jump on this animal and ride it around, which I would not advise it if you've never ridden one. It's very scary. Probably could have fallen and died. Didn't live to tell the story. It was like the best day of my life. I get off this horse, and he's like, what do you want to do now? I'm like, I don't know. You live here. I don't. And I feel like I'm in Lion King. You own everything as far as the eye can see. Tell me, what can we do? And he's like, well, I guess we could ride the 4-wheelers. And I'm like, do you understand how cool your house is? Like, in my house, I'm like, I guess we could play, like, the previous PlayStation that no one owns anymore. Like, that'd be real cool. Like, he's like, we ride the 4-wheelers. I'm like, yeah, we could. I want to drive things, because when you're 8 or 9, you don't get to drive anything. You're just like, show me where the engines are. And so we ride these 4-wheelers, like, all around his property, and there's, like, ponds everywhere. And I'm like, I think that I'm, like, in Africa now. I'm on just, like, an adventure. And we pull up to this gate, and he looks over, and I'm like, well, what's in there? And he goes, well, that's where we keep the deer. And I said, time out. No one keeps the deer anywhere. People keep cats, and people keep dogs. You're telling me you keep deer? And he's like, well, yeah, like, we raise them up, and then we sell them off to property, and then people, like, and like hunt for them. I'm like, but like right now, they're your pets. And he's like, I guess. I'm like, you're telling me I can walk up to that fence and pet a deer? And he's like, if you want to. Yeah, I do. So I walk up to the fence. I'm just sitting there like, the end of your life is going to be terrible, but right now, this is the highlight of my life. Thank you, Mr. Deer. It was just crazy. Everything was nuts. And it was in that moment that I decided that I was like, I think this guy might be the best man in my wedding one day, because I plan to spend every weekend for the rest of my life at Clint's house, because it's awesome, and it's way more fun than my house, because our backyard is this big, and his backyard is Georgetown, Texas. Like, this is going to be awesome. And so I quickly decided, man, me and Clint are going to be friends. I don't care what Clint has to say about it. I've decided friendship on. But here's the deal. It had nothing to do with Clint. I did not care if Clint was like a serial killer. Like, it did not matter who Clint was. I really liked what being friends with Clint offered me. I did not care what he liked or who he was as a person or like his deep emotions or feelings, which as dudes, we don't really care about those things anyway. But I was like, I didn't care about those things. I just want to come over to your house. If you don't want to be my friend, do you have a sibling? I will be friends with them. I want to hang out here. And we talk about that because as we talk about who is Jesus, here's kind of how we treat Jesus, our relationship with Jesus. We really like what Jesus can get us more times than we like who Jesus is. If we were to really think about our relationship with Jesus, it's mostly defined by what he can do for us or what he can get us than it is in the fact that he is God in the flesh. And so what I mean by that, and if you want to take kind of a moment where you go, man, is that what my relationship with God is like? Think about your prayer life. A lot of our prayer lives, mine included often, is, hey, Jesus, can you do this? Like, can you do this? Can you do this? And when we talk about, hey, man, has God ever answered a prayer for you? We're like, no, I asked for 72 things to my Jesus, Santa Claus, and he has not come through on any of them. Well, like our prayer life, that we communicate with Jesus is about, hey, what can you do for me, Jesus? What can you make happen? When we want to follow Jesus, we go, man, when we struggle in our faith, what we're struggling with is like, oh, like he hasn't done anything for me lately, and so I feel like he's not there, because we measure the presence of God by what he has done in that moment, by the benefits that come with Jesus. And what we're going to find out is as we're figuring out who Jesus is, there's this moment in Scripture where people are really concerned with what Jesus can do for them and not so concerned with actually believing in Jesus, that he is God and that he has come for them. They don't really want a relationship. What they want are all the things that would come out of knowing Jesus. To keep Jesus at just enough of a distance, they don't have to know him, but they can have all the things he has to offer them. And here's the deal. If we were to sit down and go, man, tell me like about your best friend, like the person that knows you, man, what do you love about them? What do you think? You're not going to go, man, their house is huge. That's why they're my best friend. Like they've got all the cool toys. Their car is legit. Their sound system in that car is awesome. And their music, not the worst. Right? Like that's not going to be the conversation we have. What you're going to do is you're going to begin to tell me about that person. Not what they do for you, but like about, oh man, they're good. They're trustworthy. Man, they're loving. They're people of character. They're people of integrity. You're going to be able to tell me about them, the character of them, who they are, not what they do for you. And so if we're to say, man, we want to have a relationship with Jesus, who is God in the flesh, then we need to be able to make sure that we have a relationship that's about him and not what he can do for us. And so in John 6, we have this moment. There's actually a series of crazy moments in John 6. The first is that Jesus sits down and he's preaching, and the disciples literally lean over and they look at Jesus and they go, hey, everybody's getting really hungry. And listen, I have been preaching for a few years. When people start to get hungry, that's when I know to get to the last illustration, okay? Like, that's when I know the eyes are going everywhere. They're like, all right, is it lunchtime yet? And so they're looking around, and they go, hey, Jesus, like, you're a really good preacher. Some might say the best. I don't know. But they're getting hungry, and so Jesus goes, oh, fine. Give me that kid's lunch. And we're like, well, that's rude, Jesus. You can't just steal kids' lunch. I know that one. Not a good idea. And he's going to give me this kid's lunch. And then he feeds 5,000 people with a lunch, which is a very difficult thing to do because I have trouble feeding one of me with just one lunch, okay? And Jesus goes, man, I'm going to feed 5,000 people with this. Now, here's the deal. When you eat, especially if you're a teenager and you're growing and everything, a few hours later, sometimes a few minutes later, what happens? You get hungry again. Right? Like you're like, that was a snack. You're like, that was 3 meals. No, that was a snack. And so we go, man, so these people, and they've seen a dude, and here's the deal. Of all Jesus' miracles, you've got to believe this is the one, this is like a fan favorite. Okay, when Jesus comes into town and he's like, yeah, I'm healing people over here and bringing people to life over here, they're like, oh, that's great for some distant person over there, but I don't have anybody sick around me. That doesn't really benefit me in this moment. But if you're in a town and Jesus feeds 5,000 of your town, like he's going to have the longest drive-through in the city, okay? Like that's the one that people are going to be talking about. That's the one that's exciting. And so in this moment, Jesus feeds them all. And then the disciples, they go over to a place called Capernaum. It's just across the sea a few miles. And then there's this crazy moment where Jesus walks on the water and he has this interaction with Peter where Peter walks out on the water. And I'm pretty sure neither you nor I have ever seen anybody walk on the water, so I'm sure that was a really crazy moment. Like you're like, Jesus, you just fed 5,000 people and now you're telling me you don't need boats. Like what is next? And so he goes out and then he meets them at Capernaum. He goes with them to Capernaum. And the next day, all the people who were fed are like, I'm hungry again. Look at that Jesus, dude. And it's like when you go to your favorite restaurant and you eat, and then you're like the next day, you're like, I could do that again. Yeah, that would be great. And so they wake up and they go, man, where is Jesus? And they notice that his disciples have gone on without him. They figure out that he's in Capernaum, and then they all jump in their boats and go to lunch via looking for Jesus. Like that's their moment. Like could have gone anyone else. They go, you know what? We're going to get in the boats and we're going to find that dude again because that was nuts. And so they get in these boats, and here's what happens in verse 22. It says, the next day, the crowd that had stayed on the other side of the sea saw there had been only one boat. And they also saw that Jesus had not boarded the boat with his disciples, but that his disciples had gone off alone. And then some boats from Tiberias came near the place where they had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. And when the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and went to Capernaum looking for Jesus. And when they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, Rabbi, when did you get here? This is kind of like that moment, right? When you're like, you run into somebody and you're like, oh, like I was just in the neighborhood. And you're like, in a neighborhood that's not yours, where there's nothing to offer you? Like, I think you're stalking me. Like, it's that moment where they're like, Jesus, what are you doing in Capernaum? And Jesus' response should be, what are you doing in Capernaum? You should be over there. So they have this small talk moment with Jesus, and he says, Jesus answered, truly I tell you, you were looking for me, not because you saw the signs, but because you ate the loaves and were filled. Don't work for the food that perishes, but for the food that lasts for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you because God the Father has set his seal of approval on him. And so at this moment, Jesus calls him out and says, hey, you're not looking for me because you want more of me. You're looking for me because you want more sandwiches. Like, that's why you're here, to see me. And he goes, and here's the deal. God has something to offer you, food that lasts for eternal life. Now, if you're hungry and you're told that there's a food out there that will never leave you hungry again, you're like, please, tell me more about this food. So they say, what can we do to perform the works of God, they ask. They're basically asking, how do we multiply lunch into thousands? And Jesus replied, this is the work of God, that you believe in the one he has sent. And they said, well, what sign then are you going to do so we may see and believe you? They asked, what are you going to perform? They are now asking the man who has walked on water and fed 5,000 people to show them why he's God, which I think is what I would call insanity. Because he's proven a few things in the last 24 hours. He says, well, what are you going to do? He says, our ancestors, they ate manna in the wilderness. And just as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. They reference this Old Testament moment where bread is just falling from heaven and people are gathering it up in order to survive in the desert. And so Jesus says to them, truly I tell you, Moses didn't give you bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Jesus is really kind of showing his hand at this point. He's like, listen, we're not talking about food anymore. We're talking about me. And then they said, sir, give us this bread always. Again, a very hungry people, very needy. And this is what Jesus says about himself right here. Here's what I want to zone in. I am the bread of life, Jesus told them, and no one who comes to me will ever be hungry, and no one who believes in me will ever be thirsty again. But as I told you, you've seen me, and yet you do not believe. Everyone the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will never cast out. For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. This is the will of him who sent me, that I should lose none of those he has given me, but should raise them up on the last day. For this is the will of the Father, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him will have eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. And then the Jews started complaining about him because he said, I am the bread from heaven. Jesus has this moment and he says, you're looking for this thing that I can give you. And Jesus does a lot of healing and he does a lot of miracles. And we got to know that every time Jesus does a miracle, he's not trying to just fill this need over here. Jesus is trying to point to who he is. There's an end goal in this miracle. And so Jesus, even as he feeds 5,000, he's not just going, oh man, hungry people, let's throw them a meal. Jesus wants to point to who he is. And so in this moment, he goes, hey, that's so great that you had a meal. What I have to offer you is more than a quick meal. It is eternal life. And it's not through food, it's through me. And so when Jesus goes, I am the bread of life, he says this thing where he goes, I satisfy you forever. You see this moment where you're unsatisfied because you're hungry again? I satisfy you forever. He says, you will spend your whole life chasing things that you think will satisfy you. And he says, don't work for those things that will disappear. Don't work for the things that will leave you unsatisfied. Don't spend your energy on the things that will leave you unsatisfied. Don't spend your energy on pursuing popularity because you think that when enough people know you, then you will be satisfied. Don't spend your energy on pursuing sex because you think when you have enough of it, you will be satisfied. Don't spend your energy on getting to certain places in teams and winning certain championships because you think then that you will be satisfied, because eventually they will leave you unsatisfied. And all that you can achieve, eventually it will return void. But if you pursue me and you give your life to me, I will satisfy you for eternity. And here's the struggle. A lot of us sitting here, and we've grown up in church, and we're like, man, I prayed a prayer, VBS, I follow Jesus, and we go, but regularly, I find myself unsatisfied by who Jesus is. And I would say this, you're not unsatisfied by Jesus. You're unsatisfied because you thought that Jesus would have given you more by now. You started following Jesus, or you fell in love with Jesus, or you started all these things, not because of who Jesus is, but because of what you thought he would give you. And when it felt like he wasn't returning on those things, then you stopped caring about Jesus. And I know, because in my struggle, when I struggle in my faith, it's not that I've stopped loving Jesus, it's that I'm frustrated that he hasn't given me what I thought he was going to give me. It's because I thought he was going to give me a meal, and there's something bigger at stake. So, man, when we struggle, it's often what we're trying to say, if we were to really put it into words, is Jesus didn't do in my life what I thought he was going to do by now, or he didn't make me feel a certain way by now, and so I'm struggling. It's because we came looking for a meal, not looking for Jesus. And it leaves us empty. Because when we choose to follow Jesus, when Jesus says, man, you will be satisfied in me, here's the deal. There's a phrase that goes around in the church world, and I love it because I hate it. And I'm just that kind of personality. The things that I hate just burn a little fire in my stomach. And it's this idea, right, like when we're church shopping, when we're looking for a church, and we talk to somebody, and they go, oh, man, like I just don't want to go to church. I don't want to be there. And what they say is, I'm just not being fed. I'm just not being fed. Oh, I'm so hungry. I don't want to be fed. And I go, you are 50 years old. Feed yourself. You are 16 years old. Feed yourself. You're not being fed? What you're saying is the pastor and all this stuff, I mean, he's not satisfying me. Yeah, he's not, because he's not Jesus. You came looking for a meal, but Jesus came offering himself. That when we follow Jesus, the way that we're satisfied is not just in this one-time decision. We prayed a prayer, we thought that everything was going to be better in that moment at the altar, but that in the regular, daily following of him, the persistent relationship with him, the spending time with him in prayer and in the word, that when we come back from all the stuff that returns void and we join in with Jesus and we spend time with him, that it leaves us satisfied. And so a lot of the times the reason that we're not satisfied is not only just because he didn't do what we thought he was going to do, but because we're never spending time with him. And let me tell you, you're going to be hungry if you never eat. And if you're always expecting somebody else to feed you, then you're going to starve to death. Jesus says, man, I'm the bread of life. We need to show up regularly and dine there in the presence of Jesus. That's when we understand Jesus isn't inviting us to a decision or a certain morality or to church attendance or to be nice little good kids. Jesus is inviting us to a lifetime of following him that satisfies. The bread of life. Not the bread of a moment. Not the bread of Sundays. Not the bread of Wednesdays. The bread of life. Not to give us a new set of rules, but to invite us back into a relationship with God. That without Jesus, catch this, I do not care what you think, and you can disagree with me. Without Jesus, you don't know God. You may know that there's a God. You may believe that there's a God that is present. But Jesus is the only way back to God. He says, I am the bread of life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. That is where the satisfaction is that for all of time, we're at war with God. We rebel against him in his ways, and Jesus invites us back into a relationship with him. And we can't have it any other way. And then we're satisfied when we have a right view of what it looks like to walk with Jesus, to rest in him, to understand peace and patience and kindness and goodness and gentleness, all the things that happens when the Spirit resides in us. And here's the danger. Here's the danger when we don't find satisfaction in Jesus, or when we only want a meal and we don't want him. When I was a kid, I was in 6th grade, and my brother is 6 years older than me, so he's quite a bit older than me. And we grew up in a Christian home, and so we did Christian things. Like, we were one of those families that, like, I felt like it was like every couple years, my mom was like, we're going to do family devotionals. And we did family devotionals for like 3 days. And she's like, we're not going to do family devotionals. We'd get in a fight painting my room, and my mom would make us hold hands and pray. And I'm like, I don't want to talk to you or Jesus, Mom. Like, this is the worst. And my older brother, like, was a pretty good kid. He grew up in church. He was really like a youth ministry kid. He kind of struggled because he really loved like metal, and at the time people were like, metal's for Satanists, and we're like, that can't be true. But he loved Jesus, and he was largely probably a better kid than I was as I grew up. And I remember going to youth ministry as a 6th grader, and I'm like, listen, I'm not there for Jesus, man. Like, I'm there to play ball and hang out with friends. And my brother serves on the leadership team of our youth ministry at the time, and he pulls me away from this epic game of 21 that I'm trying to play, and he's like, hey, there's some cards over here, and we're going to sit down, and we're going to pray for the service today. And I'm like, do I get a choice? Like, I don't want to do that. I was playing a game. I don't know if you saw me. I'm still real sweaty. And he's like, no, we're going to sit here. We're going to pray. And I remember this moment because I was like, man, my brother was very much like a spiritual leader at the time that I was a kid. And then when I grew up and we go into my senior year of high school, I've shared my testimony a million times, and in that, when we lost my mom, the whole world shook, like everything got crazy. And I remember going and sitting down at like dinner one night, and it's just me and my brother, and we're talking about the whole situation. It's just like the first few months after she had passed, and that was when, as a high school senior, my brother was like, "Yeah, I don't believe anymore." And he was like, "Because if God is who He is, then this bad thing couldn't have happened." And I remember sitting there thinking, going like, man, through all of this, it never in my mind was like, so I'll just stop believing. Like, this thing can't be real. And so I was like, what happened to the guy who was my spiritual leader as a kid in his life that is not happening in mine? What has changed? And all the years since then, and someone asked me after the middle school service, who still not a believer, still wants nothing to do with God, and all the years since then, here's what I've realized. My brother wasn't following Jesus. He was following what he thought Jesus could get him. And when that stopped, so did his faith. I mean, the danger of you being more concerned about the meal than the Jesus who on Friday gives his life and on Sunday raises again. It's a faith built on sinking sand, because at some point, you're not going to get the meal. But you get God and the flesh, and when we rest in Him and we understand in who He is, then we're satisfied. But if we love Jesus because we think that He's going to give us all these things over here, then we're missing out on the fact that the one thing that He's given us that sustains is a relationship with God. And no one can steal that. He says, no one can take you from my hand. No one can take you from that relationship. No one can do that. Man, when we understand that, then we can be sustained better than anything else that we will pursue. As you go into small groups tonight, you'll talk about, man, what does it mean to be sustained by Jesus? You'll get a chance to be honest and say, hey, you know what, I don't feel satisfied in following Jesus. As a matter of fact, it feels like it returns void. Begin to look at what that looks like. Say, man, are you really following Jesus, or are you attending church? There's a very big difference. Are you putting Christ at the center of what you do? Are you really looking into who He is? Are you diving into the mysteries of Jesus? Not are you doing more, but are you spending time with Jesus? Are you feeding regularly? Or you just really hope that He's going to do the next thing for you? That He's going to do the next miracle? Let's bow our